Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to the weekly Trump Date, where we go over this week's top stories regarding the Trump administration. I'm your host, Jardo Sosa, and this week marks March 17th to the 21st. This week we've seen news on government cuts, backlash from both parties, Trump invoking a 200-year-old act, Trump beefing with federal judges, and updates on the Russia-Ukraine war and the Gaza-Israel war. It was a close call last Friday, with enough Democrats deciding to vote on the bill to avoid a government shutdown hours before the deadline. Last Friday, Trump signed an executive order that gutted about 7 different agencies, one of which being Voice of America. If you don't know what that is, it's the biggest and oldest U.S. international broadcaster, created in 1942 to fight Nazi propaganda through the radio. Its mission has been to fight authoritarian propaganda and spread U.S. values across the world. It's not broadcasted in the US, which is why a lot of people don't know it exists, but it's played an important role in the past 80 years. Everyone who worked for Voice of America, like employees in other agencies, were placed on administrative leave. It's been criticized before by Trump-related people as putting out fake news, and Trump even called it the voice of radical America. This basically means the US is losing a source of news that it wouldn't normally see. On Tuesday morning, we started to get a look at how Trump's budget cuts could start affecting school lunches, with the USDA cutting $1 billion in funding last week. Some of that money being used for local food for school programs that provide students with free food, which is now in jeopardy. The idea behind free fresh food is students who eat healthy will be healthier and learn more, according to Melanie Woke, the director of food service. For a lot of students, this is their only fresh meal a day. A local farmer by a school being affected said that 1/3 of his business could be impacted by these cuts. But the director said that they're going to feed the kids no matter what. The U.S. Agency for International Development, also known as USAID, is also back in the discussion. A federal judge ordered the Trump administration to restore parts of the department. Basically, just systems of the USAID, like emails and payment systems, to make sure that the employees and contractors are able to get paid, and also making sure that security notifications are able to be sent out to people around the world. On Wednesday, a district judge ruled that the fast closure from Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, otherwise known as DOGE, likely violated the Constitution in multiple ways. Also ordering that DOGE can't do anything on their own and they need to have a USAID official with authorization to make the orders happen. In response to the ruling, Trump said that he guarantees they're going to appeal it and that we have rogue judges destroying our country. The idea that the executive branch has the power to dismantle an agency without congressional authority goes above the power that the executive branch actually has. The judge stating that Elon Musk says he's just an advisor, but he's doing more than what an advisor should be doing. Trump's reasoning for dismantling these agencies is to help get rid of waste and fraud. But this victory isn't the end. It's just an injunction, which means that it has a limited time period and it's eventually going to expire, which gives the Trump administration another chance of doing it right. On Thursday, we heard that Trump's planning on closing hundreds of Social Security field offices and cutting thousands of jobs. A big change coming to Social Security is no longer being able to verify your identity over the phone, which makes things harder for people that already have trouble getting out of their house. Coming from DOGE, who's using claims of voter fraud and illegal immigration to pitch for the cuts, but hasn't provided any evidence yet. This change coming after some people might have to verify their identity soon. The Trump administration saying they're not going to cut any benefits, but these field offices are going to become way more crowded, which makes it harder for people to even get those benefits. Trump also signed an executive order instructing Linda McMahon to start dismantling her Department of Education. His reasoning being that American students have falling test scores, even though the US spends more on students than any other country, and we still rank near the bottom in terms of success. This coming after already cutting half the workforce of the Department of Education. The latest national report shows that 40% of 4th graders don't pass the basic benchmark for reading. Just for more context, we're actually 5th in the world in terms of spending money on students. Trump said the nation's report card shows poor educational outcomes, but it actually shows how states are educating students in their district, not how the federal government's doing it. Trump says that services for children with disabilities or special needs aren't going to be impacted, but people are concerned because if you've cut the workforce in half, you're not going to be able to provide the same amount of service as you did before. This week, lawmakers on both sides are facing backlash at town halls that were hosted. Some Republicans are mad at Trump and Musk's government cuts, while some Democrats are frustrated with their party's lack of fight. Republicans have shown frustration over DOGE and cuts because they don't want their benefits to be affected. They're worried about things like Social Security and veteran healthcare. Democrats are frustrated, but they're especially frustrated with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. AOC and Bernie Sanders were also at these meetings. Now on to immigration. The Trump administration invoked the Wartime Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to deport hundreds of alleged members of a Venezuelan gang to El Salvador. The act was 227 years ago and grants the president power to deport/detain any non-citizens over the age of 14. Keep in mind, this was a time where America didn't have ICE, didn't have the FBI, didn't have the CIA. It didn't have a lot of the resources that we have right now. During this time, when the president had to wait for Congress to meet, he had to wait for them to hop on their horses and get to a meeting. So instead, they granted him more expansive power. The deportation was announced after a federal judge had already blocked the effort on Saturday, so it raised questions about how legal the deportation was. The White House has been vocal about how they did not violate the court order. On Saturday, the ACLU went to court because they believed that Trump was going to invoke the act. So the judge, James Boasberg, issued a restraining order that was later rewritten to include all U.S. non-citizens that were in custody by the country. The point is, there was a plane in the air that was supposed to come back and wasn't, and the White House was trying to say that it's because there was some time between the actual ruling and it being on paper. When Trump was asked about this overnight on Monday as he was on Air Force One, he said that he didn't actually know whether they violated the court order and that they should speak to the lawyers, but that these people were really, really bad people and they couldn't get any worse. Sometimes the judge issues a written order, but a lot of the times the judge just speaks from the bench and the transcript becomes the order. If we look at the transcript from the decision, Boasberg said, "Let me be clear. Planes that have already landed and disembarked their passengers, I can't order them to come back. I don't have jurisdiction over them." Basically saying that if the plane is still in the air and US custody, bring it back. At a hearing, Boasberg asked the Department of Justice why they refused to give up information about the flights. And he calls the administration's failure to comply them saying that they don't care and they're going to do what they want. Another hearing is scheduled for Friday. The plaintiffs in this case want to see the government issue some sort of statement before the judge saying that they did not violate the orders and go over the timings of the actions. As of Monday, we don't know who the people that were deported are yet, but we know that they've been handed over to the government to be put into prisons. Trump also said that former President Biden's 11th hour pardons of the January 6th committee were void because they were auto-pen signatures. The argument here would be, is it considered a presidential pardon if the president didn't issue it himself and had no knowledge of it? The next steps are probably going to be going through footage or video to see if Biden ever acknowledged the pardons. Monday night, there was a grad student, Badar Khan Suri, from India who teaches at Georgetown University and was arrested by federal agents for allegedly spreading terrorist propaganda. Masked agents arrested Suri outside of his home in Virginia after they had told him the government had revoked his visa. Assistant Department of Homeland Security Secretary Tricia McLaughlin said on X that Suri was actively spreading Hamas propaganda and promoting anti-Semitism on social media. She also alleged that Suri had a connection to a known or suspected terrorist, a senior advisor to Hamas. All of this happening after another grad student, Mahmoud Khalil, was arrested for something similar last week, adding to an already growing discussion over the limits of free speech. The Trump administration is using a law that grants the Secretary of State power to deport visa holders whose presence has adverse foreign policy consequences. On Wednesday, Chief Justice John Roberts defended Boasberg after Trump called for the impeachment of a federal judge who tried to block the swift deportation, labeling Boasberg as a radical left lunatic. Roberts wrote that impeachment is not the right response over disagreements regarding judicial decisions. On Thursday, Boasberg issued a new warning to the Trump administration, saying that there will be consequences if they fail to respond to his questions by Friday. Trump adding to the fire, saying that federal agents are intentionally trying to derail his agenda. Federal law enforcement is giving a little more information, saying that deported migrants included members of two gangs the president designated as terrorist organizations, Tren de Aguas and MS-13. According to NBC, they've already found 37 rulings from federal judges that have at least temporarily blocked actions from President Trump, including a U.S. District Judge, Honor Ray, is blocking his executive order banning transgender people from the military because it violates the Fifth Amendment's Equal Protection Clause because it discriminates based on gender, status, and sex. But she delayed her order until Friday, which gives the administration time to appeal it. We also saw the Trump administration pause $175 million to his alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania, for allowing a trans athlete to participate on the women's swim team. The university is saying that they're aware of the media reports, but they haven't gotten any official notifications. On Thursday night, the Department of Justice released a statement saying that Boasberg trying to get his hands on information the government says that he shouldn't have is judicial overreach. We also saw Colombia indicating they're going to comply with the administration's demands in order to restore $400 million in federal funding after the White House accused them of failing to address ongoing harassment of Jewish students. Now onto the economy. On Wednesday, the Federal Reserve announced that it was holding interest rates steady at 4.3%, which is the rate that you use to borrow for mortgages and auto loans. And the S&P 500 closed up Wednesday night. The Federal Reserve sent out some mixed signals on where it sees the economy going this year. The Federal Reserve chief says that inflation risks remain higher than expected. Some committee members are factoring potential policy effects into the forecasts. We don't know the impact on the tariffs yet until April 2nd, which is when most of them are going to come into effect. At this point, all we know is that interest rates are going to stay where they're at and prices are going to rise. Finally, we have updates on both of the wars going on right now. On Monday, we heard that Trump thought there might be some kind of announcement after his conversation with Putin on Tuesday. Over the weekend, he said a lot of it was agreed upon, and the conversation he planned to have included talking about land, power plants, and dividing assets. Ukraine already agreed to a 30-day ceasefire deal, which led to the US lifting restrictions on military aid and intelligence sharing. The conversations over the weekend were just trying to get Russia on board. President Zelensky said he's on board with it and he would stop fighting. He would get rid of all military support on air and land if Russia does the same. But President Zelensky's had doubts before, saying that Putin is trying to extend the war. Ukrainians believe that Russia's trying to bait and switch kind of tactic because at first it was a 30-day ceasefire deal and now it's some kind of end of conflict agreement. He's worried Trump will sign something called a separate peace, which is an agreement to stop fighting with another country, even though the US had already promised to support its allies who are still at war. This could leave the Ukraine vulnerable and Europe struggling to respond. Zelensky thought he was going to be in a stronger position than he is now. After the call on Tuesday, which Trump said lasted 2 hours, we learned that Putin rejected the full ceasefire deal, but agreed on a 30-day ceasefire on attacks on energy infrastructure. US envoy Steve Witkoff later said that officials from the US and Russia are going to continue these talks in Saudi Arabia this Sunday. Zelensky also said that he was planning on calling Trump for a debrief since he hadn't received one yet. Despite the agreement, Ukraine and Russia were still accusing each other of targeting infrastructure. Kiev said that Russian drones damaged a hospital in eastern Ukraine, and Moscow said that Ukrainian drones hit an oil depot in southern Russia. Some people are saying that Putin might be playing Trump, and he's buying time with his negotiations to try to continue his attacks on Ukraine. The Kremlin readout saying that a key condition for Russia to agree to a ceasefire deal is the complete cessation of all foreign and military aid and intelligence sharing to Kiev. President Trump stated that this did not come up in their conversation at all. Because of this and other discrepancies, some people are worried that the two sides aren't even on the same page. On Tuesday night, there was a drone attack in Kiev with about 70 drones. This makes Ukraine trust Putin less because more people are being killed. They want to know how the US plans to make sure that Russia won't attack anymore. After his call with Trump, Zelensky asked for additional air support systems to help protect its people, which Trump agreed to work on finding something that was available, particularly in Europe. On Monday night, Israel launched a large-scale attack on the Gaza Strip, killing more than 400 people and injuring hundreds of others, including women and children, ordered by Benjamin Netanyahu because of what they call a repeated refusal of Hamas to release hostages. Residents said there was no warning. It was 2 a.m. on Tuesday when aerial strikes were launched on 3 main areas. This has been the first major attack since the first phase of the ceasefire deal with Hamas expired earlier this month. For the past couple of weeks, Israel has been holding life-saving humanitarian aid like food, water, and trucks have installed at the border, the raft crossing going into Gaza. One senior Hamas official said that Israel's strikes were essentially a death sentence for the hostages. Hamas has suggested in these small talks of the possibility of dismantling the civilian arm, but not the military arm.